Jimmie Johnson says NASCAR's business model is antiquated and suggests sweeping changes are on the horizon. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Happy Friday, folks. Bristol triple header weekend begins tonight with the Craftsman Truck Series race on FS1. Kyle Larson gets a second shot at a clean weekend sweep. Tomorrow, the Xfinity Series Dash for Cash. I'm not so secretly rooting for my podcast co-host Brennan Poole to pull off the upset of all upsets. And then the Cup race on Sunday. What version of Bristol Motor Speedway will we see? It's the same tire compound that was used at both races last season, but you remember the spring and fall Bristol races looked completely different one season ago. So a huge mystery awaits us on Sunday. Bristol, one of my favorite tracks. Hopefully we get some great action this weekend. Lots of news to catch up on today, things I've missed from the past week. We'll begin, unfortunately, with some very, very sad news out of the NASCAR garage. Al Pearce, longtime motorsports rider, covered 56 Daytona 500s. Goodness gracious, sadly passed away earlier this week. A kind man, a strong work ethic, respected by all of his peers, a staple of the NASCAR media world for decades. And also Jon Edwards, longtime Hendrick Motorsports media rep, worked with Jeff Gordon for years, most recently with Kyle Larson. He also tragically passed away this week. I met Jon for the first time just earlier this year, but just our few conversations, I was taken aback by how humble he was. Man had years of experience working with the biggest names in American racing, yet was extremely generous with his time, was very supportive. Again, I was blown away by his humility. Very kind man. Very, very sad news this week across the NASCAR media world. Sending best wishes to Al Pearce's friends and family and colleagues, and same for Jon Edwards and the entire Hendrick Motorsports family. Really tragic stuff. We do have quite a bit of NASCAR news to comment on this Friday. We'll talk about Jimmie Johnson, the NASCAR Hall of Famer, 7-time champion, now owner of Legacy Motor Club. He appeared on a podcast overseas about a week ago and had some very pointed comments regarding NASCAR's current business model and where he believes the industry is headed. We'll react to some of those comments in a few moments. We'll begin, though, with Katherine Legge, who coincidentally is a British race car driver herself. She announced this week that she will run at least 7 more NASCAR races this season, split between the Xfinity and the Cup Series. I want to be respected as one of the best drivers in motorsport, and there's no better place to hone my skill set against the best of the best in front of the largest motorsport audience in the US. With the pivot to go all in on NASCAR, we are diversifying my own racing legacy as well as the paddock for future generations. Her first Xfinity Series race will be Rockingham next week. She's got the Charlotte Oval race on her schedule, and her next Cup Series start will come at Mexico City, a road course. This is how she should have launched her stock car racing return. That deal at Phoenix a few weeks ago was not the best place to start. She should have either run some Xfinity races first or started with a Cup Series road course race, something a little more in her wheelhouse. To dive right into a short, challenging oval in the slowest car in the field, that wasn't a great idea. I respect what Katherine Legge is trying to do, and naturally, being the first woman to race in the NASCAR Cup Series since Danica Patrick, she faces an uphill battle. To give Danica some credit, she did break through barriers, but the way she was rushed to Cup and her subsequent lack of success, in my opinion, created a stigma that women since have had to overcome. Katherine Legge is a real race car driver, very experienced across multiple disciplines. I don't believe she's a token. I think her upcoming schedule, some Xfinity ovals, then a Cup road course race, are really going to launch her NASCAR return in a much more positive way. This is how she should have gone about things to begin with. I get that sponsorship money comes and goes. You got to take the opportunity when you can, but hopefully these next few races can kind of erase the bad taste that Phoenix left. I am pulling for Katherine Legge. I hope she is successful. Now moving on, a familiar NASCAR sponsor has returned to the track this season. Many have noticed the Aaron's colors on Front Row Motorsports' cars this season. Well, today they unveiled a new paint scheme that features the return of an iconic mascot. And no, I'm not talking about Michael Waltrip, The lucky dog is back on the car. The Aaron's lucky dog, back like he never left. Fans still refer to the free pass rule sometimes as the lucky dog, as it was known years ago when Aaron's had that sponsorship. The lucky dog is back on the paint scheme. That's pretty cool. Fun little throwback post Darlington throwback weekend. Love to see it. We also love to see NASCAR drivers and team owners being candid about the state of the sport for over an hour. That's what Jimmie Johnson, owner of Legacy Motor Club, did last week. He appeared on the Business of Sport podcast in London, where Jimmie Johnson, of course, lives and has lived for the past couple of years. He kind of splits his time now between London and the Charlotte area, working more hands-on with the race team he now majority owns. I'll link the full hour-plus podcast down in the description below because I highly encourage any NASCAR fan to give it a listen. A ton of interesting stuff and unique perspectives in here. A few things that jumped out at me. Adam Stern Sports Business Journal reported like a year ago that NASCAR was trying to work a spending cap, a cost cap, into the new charter agreement. We haven't heard much about that since, but on this podcast, Jimmie Johnson basically confirmed that it's happening. Jimmie said, quote, "There's a hard cap coming into play in 2027. It's still being negotiated, but I would assume anything that promotes the sport would be excluded." Jimmie goes on to suggest that things like race shops, which he says function almost like team museums, would also be excluded from this spending cap. Driver contracts, he believed, would not fall under the spending cap. But he says things like technology, obviously, R&D, travel would. He says it's still being negotiated, but he throws out a year, 2027. Now, Formula One implemented their own form of a spending cap a few years ago. It's been brought up on the NASCAR side before, but a lot of folks have pushed back against it. As Jimmie talks about on this show, it's very difficult to know now what exactly is going to be included in a hard spending cap. Jimmie says that the next gen is basically a soft spending cap because spec car means there's a limit as to how much the teams can develop themselves. But a hard cap would be different. It would be new. It would be revolutionary for NASCAR, at least. I can see both sides. The argument in favor of implementing a spending cap might go something like, hey, the teams are still not profitable. We're losing money. Remember, famously, a few years ago, Joe Gibbs Racing supposedly was spending over $1 million to develop slightly faster pit guns. That's the kind of extravagant spending that I think NASCAR would like to rein in. Another positive, depending on who you ask, is that a spending cap could increase parity. Jimmie Johnson said on this podcast that the next-gen car allowed him to buy in and be more competitive. If this was the old system, he says, he didn't have the money to compete with a Hendrick or a Penske. So theoretically, with the next-gen car with a hard spending cap, these mid-sized teams might be able to compete with the big teams more frequently. So that could be the argument in favor, but there's also an argument against implementing a hard spending cap. For one, it would probably cut more jobs. The whole NASCAR industry would contract at least a little bit more. Team owner Denny Hamlin has famously railed against the constant cost-cutting measures. And if we go back to parity, for some, that's a good thing. For others, parity is a dirty word. Evening the playing field sounds great in theory, but as we've seen the past few years, with everything equal cars, drivers seeing the same data, driving tracks the same way, it's harder and harder to pass than ever before. We're back to like the 2019-2021 where the racing is close, it looks good on TV, but if you look even closer, you'll see that it's harder than ever to pass. So much aero push. At certain tracks, I would argue the racing product has actually gotten worse. So broadly speaking, those are some of the arguments for and against implementing a spending cap. There are so many underlying business details and numbers and money that also, of course, would come into play. At first glance, I think I like the idea of not including driver salaries under the spending cap. NASCAR might cap how much money the teams can spend on technology, finding that extra fraction of a second. But if that gets capped, then the teams might be incentivized to go pay the driver, the human, the people, go get the best person available. If everything over here is capped, is so equal, the individuals, the drivers in this case, become all the more important. That sounds good to me in theory, but in practice, I'm not so sure. Because what about the other people that are responsible for making these cars go fast? The dozens and dozens of engineers the top teams employ. Those are people, those are individuals making a difference. Do their salaries fall under the cost cap or do they not? Can the big teams still afford to go get more and better engineers? That's going to be really interesting. If this cost cap Jimmie talks about truly goes into effect in the next 2 years, what will be included and what won't? And how will that impact the business, but more importantly, the on-track product? I'll touch on one more comment Jimmie made on this podcast. He expressed hope that the France family is going to sell off a portion of NASCAR. As we look forward, there's some rumors about NASCAR someday selling a portion off and becoming more of a league. We're all waiting and think there's real potential there. As we become a league, that's when all ships in the harbor will rise more.
As great as it is to have two families like this, it feels like an antiquated structure for a new age of media and a new age of sport.
Correct. It is antiquated and there's not enough transparency.
Again, I highly encourage you to check out the full Business and Sports podcast episode with Jimmie Johnson. It was really interesting to hear him explain some of the basics of NASCAR to British guys who don't follow stock car racing. But as you can see, he also was pretty open and honest about the good and the bad of the current business model. Really interesting. Anyway, Jimmie's overall tone in this episode was positive, very optimistic about the future of NASCAR. But what I found most interesting is that most of that positivity seemed to be rooted in the belief that the entire business model is going to change sooner rather than later. So like theoretically, if things don't change dramatically, maybe Jimmie Johnson's outlook would change. But Jimmie obviously believes that big change is on the horizon. Begs the question, will the NASCAR business model fundamentally change? Will NASCAR become more of a league? Will the France family willingly sell off a stake of their family-owned business that they've had for over 75 years? Will the courts force them to change or sell off a stake in the business? We'll have to wait and see. It definitely sounds like Jimmie Johnson is banking on the answer to most of those questions being yes. Of course, we know about the news recently that Legacy Motor Club is attempting to acquire a third charter from Rick Ware. There's debate and discussion and discourse around the contract terms, but that's ongoing. A lot of interesting stuff right now going on behind the scenes. I appreciate when someone in a position of power like Jimmie Johnson gives us at least a peek behind the curtain. Leave a comment down below. When you hear spending cap, what do you think? Do you think of Formula One? Do you think a spending cap would be effective in NASCAR and raise all ships, as they say? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. That is going to do it for this episode, folks. That'll do it for a very busy week on the channel. We had Ryan Preece on Power Hour yesterday. Go check that podcast out. It's up on YouTube, also available wherever you get your podcasts. Talked Bristol earlier this week with Dale Tanhart. Lots of good stuff on the channel you won't want to miss. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more content all year long. I'll be watching all the action at Bristol this weekend. Should be a good time. Have a great rest of your week, folks, and I'll talk to you again soon.